The human was the only one still shooting. HFY pressed its thorax against the observation port and watched the point defense turret on the Pale Meridian's dorsal hull track, fire, a rhythm so consistent it had begun to register on HFY's lateral chemoreceptors as something almost like a pulse. 3 Vresi escort ships were already gone. The ambush had taken 40 seconds. The hegemony interceptors, 4 of them, dart-shaped and fast, were making their third pass, and the one thing standing between HFY's science vessel and vaporization was a single human operating a single turret with what the ship's damage report described, with clinical understatement, as compromised structural integrity. The firing did not stop. Not once. Not between passes. The turret swiveled on its housing end, fired and tracked and fired, and the hegemony interceptors were forced. HFY watched this in something it had no chemical category for, forced into evasive patterns. They had not expected return fire. They had expected a science vessel to do what science vessels did: go dark, go silent, emit the standard Vresi distress frequency that translated across 17 species as "we are not worth the ammunition." The turret fired again. HFY sent glands, involuntary, it could not help this, released a brief pulse of Velshas, the pheromone its species produced when a situation was correctly identified as non-survivable. The glands had released it 3 times in the last 40 seconds. The chemical assessment was accurate. The odds were not debatable. The turret fired again. 1 interceptor peeled off. Then, a second. The other 2 completed their pass and then, slowly, as if reconsidering an assumption, turned away. They dropped to a holding pattern at the edge of the debris field. HFY watched their sensor sweeps on the secondary display. Calculating, presumably. Running the numbers HFY had already run. Deciding whether 1 battered science vessel, defended by 1 creature in a broken turret, was worth the cost of continuing. The turret fired once more. Into empty space. After them. The interceptors left. HFY stood very still at the observation port for a full cycle minute. Its lateral chemoreceptors were still searching. They searched for the chemical signature they were built to detect in any combatant after a sustained engagement, the involuntary distress emissions that every species produced when pushed past a survival threshold. Fear musk. Exhaustion hormone. The biochemical grammar of "I have reached my limit." Nothing. The access hatch to the turret housing opened. The human dropped through it, landed on the deck with both feet, and reached back into the housing to retrieve a spent charge casing. She turned it over once in her hand, blackened, deformed, still faintly warm, and then her eyes found the observation port. Found HFY. "They'll be back," Vasquez said. Not a warning. The pheromone translation matrix in HFY's collar implant rendered her voice in flat Vresi syntax, and, even stripped of the original tonal quality, HFY still registered something in the cadence. A certainty. A forward lean. The grammatical construction of a sentence that did not consider "they'll be back" to be bad news. She walked past HFY toward the galley without waiting for a response. "Is there food?" she said. HFY turned back to the observation port. Outside, the spent charge casing was spinning away into the dark. She had dropped it, or thrown it lightly, at some point HFY had not registered. It caught the light of the distant rim sun once before the debris field swallowed it. HFY watched it go. Its Velshas glands had gone quiet. The chemical assessment system, which had been running continuous environmental scans since the ambush began, had produced no output for the last 40 seconds. The glands were not malfunctioning. HFY checked. They were simply finding nothing to respond to. It opened its observation log. Typed, "The human did not emit," stopped. The cursor blinked in the empty space after the dash for a long time. HFY closed the log without saving. It went to find a ration pack. It ate the ration pack cold and did not complain about anything. HFY observed this from the secondary workstation, the one with the angled sightline to the engineering alcove where Vasquez had set up her operating space. The ration pack in question was Vresi formulated, which meant it was nutrient-dense, gelatinous, and, by the chemical assessment of every non-Vresi species Cathay al had ever shared a vessel with, aggressively unpleasant. The human peeled back the seal, consumed 2/3 of the contents in 4 bites, and sealed the rest for later. No hesitation. No expression. Cathay al added this to its running mental catalogue. It had been 12 hours since the ambush. In those 12 hours, Vasquez had consumed cold Vresi rations without complaint, slept in 4-minute intervals against the bulkhead with her back to the wall and her eyes closed, which Cathay al noted because most predator lineage species slept with threat assessment partially active, but the human had closed its eyes completely, like something that had never needed to be prey. Repaired 17 centimeters of blown power coupling using components she had apparently extracted from the damaged turret housing, and set her own broken collarbone. That last item was the one Cathay al kept returning to. The break had been obvious, the shoulder sitting wrong, the movement compensated, the suit's medical telemetry had flagged it within 20 minutes of the engagement ending. Cathay al had offered the ship's medical bay twice. Vasquez had said, "I've got it." She had gone to the cargo section and retrieved a length of conduit pipe, roughly the diameter of a human forearm. Then, a cargo strap, one of the braided polymer ones used to secure equipment against drive thrust. She had bitten the strap, repositioned the joint with a motion that Cathay al's pain response modeling suggested should have produced significant distress chemistry, exhaled once a single sharp sound, and then bound the shoulder tight with the conduit as a brace. Then, she went back to the power coupling. Cathay al found itself studying the knot. The binding was a specific pattern, efficient, low distributing, adjusted for the shoulder joint's range of motion restrictions. The fine motor precision required to tie it one-handed, post-fracture, under adrenaline or whatever the human equivalent was. Cathay al's xenobiology database had no entry for the specific compound, had flagged it as unclassified stimulant, possibly endogenous, did not correspond to any injury response model in the Vresi academic catalog. It was a very good knot. Cathay al pulled up its xenobiology database and searched for Homo sapiens, musculoskeletal repair, field conditions. The database returned 3 papers, all authored by Vresi researchers who had never observed the behavior directly and had relied on second-hand accounts from hegemony border patrol logs. The papers were cautious in their language. Phrases like reportedly and unconfirmed observations suggest appeared frequently. One paper concluded that the accounts were likely exaggerated, as the described behavior exceeded the physiological pain tolerance established for Class 8 and below Death World species. Cathay al looked up. Vasquez was torquing a coupling seal with her repaired shoulder, full rotation, no apparent modification to technique. It opened a new document. Began typing notes. Not the formal observation log, something faster, rougher, the kind of shorthand it used when data was arriving faster than structure could contain it. Subject continues physical labor post-fracture without apparent modification to task performance. Injury acknowledged once, verbal, treated without medical intervention, and this part is the part Cathay al kept stopping at, treated without cessation of activity. It was not that the human was not in pain. Cathay al had been watching. The compensatory micromovements were there if you knew what to look for, the slightly elevated breath rate, the way the left hand did fractionally more of the grip work on the coupling tool. The pain was present. Vasquez simply had a different relationship with it than any species Cathay al had encountered. Not numbness, the responses were there. Not suppression, the body was registering and adapting. Something else. Something that the Vresi academic catalog did not have a term for. Cathay al tried, elevated pain threshold. No. Functional dissociation. No. Neither captured it. Can I ask you something? Cathay al said. Its translation implant rendered the Vresi clicking into standard. Vasquez looked over. Yeah. On Earth. Cathay al consulted its notes. Your gravity is, the surface figure registered in the hegemony census is 9.8 of your meters per second squared. Is that typical for where you grew up? About average, yeah. And, the atmosphere. Cathay al pulled up the hegemony census entry for Sol 3. Approximately 21% oxygen, 78% nitrogen, plus trace compounds. The oxygen percentage indicates a significant oxidation risk to organic tissue. Sure. Your sun produces ultraviolet radiation at a level that burns things, yeah. Vasquez had not stopped working on the coupling. Keeps the tourists out. Cathal paused. It processed this sentence for a moment. The translation matrix offered ironic understated dismissal. Which meant the human was aware of the conditions it was describing as dangerous and had deliberately used the tourist framing to signal that awareness without engaging with it directly. A kind of humor, maybe. The matrix was not reliable on human humor. The predation pressure documented on Earth, Cathal said carefully. Class 12 designation. The large terrestrial predators, you're worried about the wolves? Among others. Vasquez finally looked up. Something moved in her face, the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. We hunted them. Most of them. Some we kept. Kept. They live in houses with us now. We call them dogs. She said this with the same tone she'd used for keeps the tourists out, flat, not cruel, just informational. They're real good boys. Cathal's scent glands produced a brief, involuntary pulse of something its system classified as social dissonance response. The apex predators of a Class 12 death world had been domesticated and given a diminutive title and now lived in human domiciles and were apparently good boys. Cathal wrote this down. All of it. Then, looked at what it had written and wrote, unknown behavioral class. Not predator. Not prey. Fourth column. Vasquez sealed the coupling, tested it, and said, that should hold for about 30 hours. Then, we're going to need to make a real repair. I have tools in the science bay. I know. I already looked. She picked up the cargo strap she'd used for her shoulder brace, had been using it as a work surface, apparently, and retied it in a different configuration without looking at her hands. Your toolkit is good. The torque driver is left-handed though. I'm left-handed, Cathal said. I know. A pause. I used it anyway. Cathal watched her walk toward the observation deck and added 3 more lines to the notes. Then, stopped and just watched. It was doing that more and more. The watching. It had started taking notes to make the watching feel scientific, official, contained within a professional framework. But, the notes were getting longer and the framework was getting thinner and what remained underneath it was something that Cathal's cultural training said was not appropriate for a xenobiologist to feel toward a research subject. Something like wanting to see what it would do next. There was a dead hegemony pilot in the debris field, and Vasquez wanted to go get him. Cathal had detected the ejection pod signature on the long-range passive sensors, faint, thermal, almost lost against the radiation scatter of the destroyed escorts. A hegemony standard issue pod. Single occupancy. The beacon was broadcasting a low-frequency distress signal that, by hegemony protocol, would not activate until the occupant had been unconscious for at least 2 hours. The math was simple. The conclusion was clear. The pod had been drifting for 9 hours. He's probably alive, Vasquez said. Probably, Cathal said. The hegemony attacked this vessel. Their interceptors killed 3 crews. Their fleet policy is active pursuit of surviving Vresi assets. If we break sensor shadow to retrieve that pod, he's alive and he's in there alone. He was trying to kill us 3 hours ago. Vasquez was already moving toward the EVA locker. She moved the way she always moved, it steady, without urgency, with the specific quality of motion that Cathal had started thinking of as already decided. As if the decision had been made some time ago and the current moment was simply implementation. Vasquez. Cathal followed, because it was a small ship. The tactical calculus, I know the tactical calculus. Then, you understand that the risk is I understand the risk. She was pulling the EVA suit from its rack. He was alive. 2 words. the translation matrix offered no subtext flags, no ironic registers, no diplomatic framing. Just the statement. He was alive. As if that were the only relevant variable. As if the rest of Cathay-Al's argument, the fleet, the sensor shadow, the hegemony, all of it simply didn't register against that one fact. Cathay-Al tried once more. We have no medical supplies adequate for I have my kit. Your kit is a cargo strap and a piece of conduit pipe. Something moved in Vasquez's expression. Almost a smile. It works. She went out through the ventral airlock. Cathay-Al stood in the EVA preparation bay and watched the pressure gauge drop and then stabilize and then listened to the soft sound of thruster bursts moving away from the hull. It did not know what to do with itself. The rational response to this moment was clear: monitor sensors, prepare for emergency departure, maintain sensor shadow, document the tactical situation. Cathay-Al did all of these things. It sat at the sensor station and ran its calculations and updated its probability models. It was thorough. It was accurate. It was not paying attention to any of it. What it was paying attention to was the medbay door. The indicator panel beside it. The small green and amber display that showed, at present, unoccupied. It stared at this display for a very long time. The concept Cathay-Al kept reaching for was Velshra. In Vresi this was a specific kind of grief, not the acute grief of sudden loss, but the rational grief of a correct assessment. The grief that came from recognizing an acceptable loss and releasing attachment to the unsurvivable outcome. Every species Cathay-Al had ever worked with had an equivalent concept. The hegemony had three. The collective had one that translated as the weight laid down. Even the rim traders, with their blunt commercial pragmatism, had a phrase: sunk cost, no receipt. Vasquez appeared to have nothing. The airlock pressurized. The inner door opened. She came through backwards, towing the pod by a recovery line she had somehow attached to her EVA suit's utility ring. The pod was about 2 meters long and badly scorched along one side. She hauled it through the airlock with her functional shoulder, the unbroken one, Cathay-Al noted, and set it on the deck. She got the pod open in 4 minutes using a multi-tool. The hegemony pilot inside was unconscious, a long laceration across his thorax sealed badly by the pod's emergency medical system, four-limbed in the standard hegemony configuration, smaller than the files suggested. His breathing was irregular but present. Vasquez picked him up. Carried him to the med bay. Set him on the surface with a care that had no tactical justification. Adjusted his position. Checked his breathing. Went to her personal supply kit and took out her last ration pack, the half she had saved from that morning, and put it beside him on the medbay shelf. She closed the door. Turned to Cathay-Al. He was alive, she said. Cathay-Al looked at the door panel. The indicator had shifted. Occupied. The light was green. It stared at the green light. It was a standard shipboard indicator. It was the same indicator panel that would be on any Vresi vessel, in any med bay, in any configuration. It was not remarkable. It was a light. Occupied. Cathay-Al reached for Velshra and found the concept had become temporarily unavailable. Not gone, it was a foundational cultural construct. It couldn't simply be gone, but somehow inaccessible, like reaching for a tool in a familiar position and finding the bracket empty. It understood, with some precision, that it had begun helping with this. That at some point during the EVA Cathay-Al had moved from documenting the human's irrational behavior to hoping the pilot was alive. The transition had been invisible. Cathay-Al had not authorized it. It opened a new log file. Typed the title, Unknown Behavioral Class. Paused. Deleted it. Typed, Unknown Behavioral Class, Transmission Vectors. Filed it. The light was still green. The hegemony annihilator dropped out of fold space 14 kilometers off the port bow, and, Vasquez said, oh good. Cathay-Al's translation matrix flagged this as sarcasm, low confidence. It reran the audio parameters. Came back with the same result. The confidence interval on the sarcasm reading was 31%, which meant the other 69% of the matrix was entertaining the possibility that the human had genuinely welcomed this development. The Annihilator was a Hegemony Class 4 fleet asset. It massed roughly 90 times the Pale Meridian. Its armament profile, according to the Vresi Academic Threat Catalog, was, do not engage, if engaged, do not survive, see also, Class 4 Annihilator, Fleet Asset Classification. The entry had no survival protocols listed. Not because the Vresi catalog was incomplete. Because there were no known protocols that resulted in survival. Vasquez was looking at the tactical display. Her expression was the one Cathay Al had started thinking of as her working face, the neutral focused look that appeared when she was processing a problem. Not afraid. Not excited. Just computing. They sent the big one, she said. Yes, Cathay Al said. The hegemony pilot Drath, his name was Drath, Cathay Al had learned this during the 6 hours since he regained consciousness, during which he had eaten Vasquez's ration pack and confirmed the Pale Meridian's position within the hegemony's patrol grid and answered every question Cathay Al had put to him with a directness that hegemony diplomatic protocol explicitly did not permit. Drath was standing in the medbay doorway. He was looking at the tactical display. He was not running. Cathay Al thought about the fact that Drath was not running. Annihilator class, Drath said. He had moved to the display. 47 standard weapons batteries. Full drive capable of pursuit at Factor 9. Hull armor rated against Class 4 ordnance. He looked at Vasquez. There are 17 recorded engagements with Annihilator-class vessels in hegemony fleet history. Yeah? Vasquez said. 14 are listed as resolved. The other 3 have no surviving documentation. Cathay Al ran its probability models. The models, which had always returned numerical outputs before, returned a result it had to look at twice. The figure was 4%. It had never input a survival scenario and received 4%. The lowest figure it had previously calculated in a genuine survival scenario was 23%, and it had classified that as non-viable. It displayed the number on the secondary screen. 4%. Vasquez looked at it. Looked at the Annihilator on the tactical display. Looked at the debris field on the navigation overlay. Better than 0, she said. She was already moving toward the engineering alcove. Cathay Al looked at the number. 4%. It sat there on the secondary screen, unambiguous, precisely calculated, representing every viable variable the ship's computer could assess. The number did not mean attempt this. It did not mean survivable. It meant, in the clearest mathematical language Cathay Al's models could produce, do not. Vasquez was pulling components from the full drive access panel. What are you? Cathay Al began. Full drive's basically gone anyway, she said. Might as well use it. She had a diagram up on her wrist display. Something hand-drawn in the shorthand she used, symbols Cathay Al had learned to partially read over the last 18 hours. The debris field is mostly our escort ships. Metal. Conducting. If I trigger a full drive collapse at an asymmetric resonance frequency, that will destroy the full drive. We're not going anywhere in a full drive with one working coupling and a collarbone brace. She was already wrist-deep in the access panel. The resonance pulse will propagate through the debris field. All that metal, all at the same time. Their sensors are going to read it as about 40 Vresi military vessels folding in simultaneously. Cathay Al looked at Drath. Drath's chromatic dermal cells, Cathay Al had documented them over the last 6 hours. The hegemony species shifted color under stress, and Drath had been cycling through 4 shades in rapid succession since the Annihilator appeared, had gone momentarily still. 40 signatures, Drath said. The Annihilator captain is required by protocol to request tactical confirmation before engaging in ambush of that scale. How long does that take? Drath thought about this. He should not have been doing this. He should have been, by hegemony military code and, by the logic of his own situation, doing anything other than this. He was helping an enemy ship plan a deception operation against a hegemony fleet asset. 11 minutes, Drath said. Before they get confirmation that it's false. That's enough, Vasquez said. Kath, I need someone on the NAV array. The pale meridian has to move during the window or this doesn't work. I'm a xenobiologist. Can you operate a NAV array? Yes, but I need someone on the NAV array. Kathal looked at the 4% on the secondary screen. Then, it looked at Vasquez, at the cargo strap shoulder brace, at the hand-drawn diagram on her wrist, at the completely unremarkable expression on her face as she reconfigured the fold drive for a purpose it had never been designed for. It picked up the conduit wrench from the deck. Walked to the NAV array station. Tell me what heading, it said. Vasquez told it. The heading went through the thickest part of the debris field, the section that had been, 14 hours ago, the Vresi heavy escort patients in resolution. The NAV array confirmed the path. The NAV array also confirmed it was extremely dangerous. Kathal began the pre-calculations. Drath, Vasquez said, from inside the fold drive access panel. You don't have to help. A long pause. The 11-minute window, Drath said. It opens faster if you use the secondary resonance coil in tandem. A shorter pause. I know the configuration. The hegemony uses the same fold drive model. Kathal did not look up from the NAV array. It heard Drath move toward the engineering alcove. It heard Vasquez say nothing, just the sound of making space at the panel. It ran the calculations. It did not look at the 4% on the secondary screen. It had decided, at some point in the last 2 minutes, that the 4% was a description of a version of this plan that did not include 2 additional sets of hands and 1 set of extremely specific hegemony technical knowledge. It did not know what percentage this version was. The model had not been built to assess it. It was beginning to think the model needed rebuilding. The Annihilator did not expect the debris field to move. The fold drive collapse triggered at 0.3 seconds past Vasquez's mark, Drath's mark. Technically, his count was more accurate. He knew the coil configuration, and the resonance pulse propagated outward through 300 meters of shattered Vresi warship in less than a second. The debris field shuddered. Every piece of conducting metal in it vibrated at the same frequency simultaneously, and, to the Annihilator's sensor array, that vibration read as 40-fold signatures emerging from a prepared ambush position. 11 minutes. The captain would request confirmation. The channel would cycle through hegemony command protocol. The confirmation would fail to arrive because there were no 40 Vresi warships, and, eventually the Annihilator's tactical team would realize this, and, then, the 11 minutes would end. Kathal moved the pale meridian into the debris corridor 3 seconds into the window. The navigation was not what the NAV array had been designed for. The passage through the remains of the patients in resolution required adjustments at a rate that exceeded the automated system's response time, which meant manual input, which meant Kathal on the array console, making corrections at intervals that secondary manipulators were not quite optimized for, in a corridor it had calculated but never flown, with sensor feeds that were partially degraded from the ambush damage and the resonance pulse. It did not think about any of this. There was no space to think about it. There was only the next correction, the next bearing, the next debris fragment that had drifted 4 centimeters from the projected path and needed to be accounted for. From the engineering alcove, the sound of something going wrong. Kath. I'm navigating. The secondary coupling on the, I know. It's going to blow in about 40 seconds. I know. Kathal made 3 corrections in the next 5 seconds. Can you fix it? A pause. The sound of Vasquez doing something to the coupling. Then, not before it blows. Can you contain the failure? A longer pause. Maybe. Probability. Better than 0. Kathal processed this. It recognized, the worst possible answer in terms of information content, and, somehow the most accurate description of the situation available. 30 seconds. The coupling blew. The sound was significant, a sharp crack that resonated through the hull in a way that registered on KTH's vibration sense organs as structural compromise, and, then, a hiss that the damage alert system classified as secondary coolant line, partial breach, non-critical at current pressure. The ship did not fall apart. KTHL continued navigating. 2 minutes later, the pale meridian cleared the far end of the debris corridor and emerged into clear space, the Annihilator behind it, still waiting for confirmation of 40 warships that did not exist. The full drive was gone. The secondary coupling was blown and patched with something KTHL couldn't immediately identify from the sound. The sensor array was running on backup power. The ship was intact. KTHL held the new bearing for 30 seconds. Then, 60. The Annihilator's sensor sweeps were still pointed at the debris field. Still waiting. Then, a sound from the engineering alcove. A scrape of something against the deck, and Vasquez emerging from the access panel. Her suit had a new tear, shrapnel, from the coupling failure, sealed from the inside with the quick bond compound she kept on her left forearm utility mount. She was doing the shoulder calculation again, KTHL could see it, the slight compensation in how she held herself. She leaned against the alcove frame and looked at the tactical display. The Annihilator. The debris field. The clear space between them and the rim. That worked, she said. It was not said with satisfaction. Not with relief. The tone KTHL consulted its matrix, found it insufficient, discarded it, was the same tone she'd used for everything else. Informational. Flat. Already oriented toward the next thing. Behind them, the Annihilator began, slowly, to turn. Its sensors had found the truth of the debris field. The 11 minutes had ended. It assessed the situation. Calculated. And then, for the second time in 18 hours, determined that the asset was not worth the cost. It left. KTHL watched the Annihilator's drive signature diminish on the sensors. It watched until the signature was gone and the display returned to the ordinary scatter of stars and debris and the distant thermal signatures of the rim colonies. It watched for a little longer than that. Then, it went to the galley and found the last ration pack. It brought the ration pack to the observation deck where Vasquez had gone to sit in the dark. Drath was already there. He had found the observation bench, KTHL's bench, technically, but Drath was sitting on one end of it and Vasquez was standing at the port and neither of them had noticed KTHL's bench had been claimed. Vasquez took the ration pack when KTHL offered it. She looked at it for a moment. Then, she held it out to Drath. Drath looked at it. He was still cycling through his stress colors, slower now, the amber to gray shift that KTHL had documented as his post-adrenaline state. His four-fingered hands came up and took the ration pack from Vasquez. He held it for a moment without opening it. His fingers long, slightly too long by Vresi proportion standards, built for the hegemony's home gravity, moved over the foil surface the way fingers moved when the hands weren't sure what to do with themselves. Carefully. The ship drifted. The observation port showed stars and the fading scatter of the debris field and the distant light of the rim sun. The recycled air smelled of coolant and the specific industrial organic compound that KTHL had started associating, involuntarily, with Vasquez's presence, not unpleasant, just there, a sensory marker its chemoreceptors had apparently decided to file under known entity, no threat assessment required. KTHL opened its log. The full document. It had been building it in fragments for 18 hours, the note about the knot, the Velshra bracket that wouldn't close, the unknown behavioral class entry, the 4%, all of it. It assembled them now into something coherent. 12,000 words, approximately. KTHL was not certain because it stopped counting at some point and just kept writing. When it was done, it looked at what it had written. Then, it opened the Xenobiological Transmission System and addressed the file to the Vresi Institute of Xenological Studies, the Academy of Interspecies Biology at Vreth Prime, the Rim Territories Research Collective, and 7 individual researchers whose work KTHL respected enough to send unsolicited documents to. It added one annotation at the end: review priority, immediate. Category, reclassification required. Current classification systems are insufficient. New framework proposed within. Cathay Al, xenobiologist, Bressy academic fleet, presently aboard the Pale Meridian, which is intact. It transmitted the file. Then, it closed the log, and opened a new one, and sat for a moment with the cursor blinking in the empty title field. Drath had opened the ration pack. He was eating it with the careful attention of someone who had not eaten in 20 hours and was trying not to show how hungry he was. He would not show it the way Vasquez would not show pain, both of them performing a kind of understatement that Cathay Al was beginning to think was not cultural coincidence. Vasquez was watching the stars. The ration pack wrapper made a small sound as Drath folded it. The ship's air recycler cycled through. Somewhere in the hull, the patched coupling clicked as the temperature stabilized. Cathay Al had a word. It had invented it, or rather, it had discovered it, the way you discover a word when you find the empty space in your language that the word should have always occupied. In Bressy, properly inflected for a witnessed phenomenon that permanently alters the observer. Veil Cath. The specific awe of watching something refuse to be reasonable and be right. Not the awe of power or force or victory. The awe of something that should not working, because the something in question had not consulted the probability model before deciding. Cathay Al typed it into the new log. Looked at it for a moment. Typed, Day 1. Closed the file. Outside the observation port, the rim sun was doing what rim suns did, burning, steady, indifferent to the debris and the departing fleet and the three living things sitting in the dark of a half-broken science vessel that should not have survived the last 18 hours and had, because one of the three living things had looked at 4% and said better than zero and meant it. Cathay Al had spent its career studying the gap between species. The ways biology and culture and history shaped the space between what something was and what other species thought it was. It had never, in all of that study, encountered a species where the gap was this size. Where the galaxy thought it knew what it was looking at. And the thing being looked at simply did not agree. Better than zero. Cathay Al looked at the ration pack wrapper in Drath's careful hands. Looked at the stars in the observation port. Looked at Vasquez, who was not looking at any of it, who was already, Cathay Al could see it, already turning some new problem over in her head, some next thing, some because we're still here and still moving calculation that would not resolve until it was resolved. The chemoreceptors had gone quiet. No valchasse. No distress. No surrender chemistry. Just the smell of coolant and stars and the recycled warmth of three living things in a small ship in the dark, intact, waiting to see what came next. Cathay Al suspected it would be interesting. The observation port of a Bressy science vessel, a curved, reinforced viewport framed in pale bone-white hull material with faint bioluminescent seams looking out onto a debris field scattered with burning wreckage. A lean insectoid alien with a segmented thorax, large faceted amber eyes, and thin articulated forelimbs presses close to the glass, its body haloed by the cold light of a distant rim sun. Beyond the glass, a point defense turret on the dorsal hull fires a bright lance into the dark. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Three sleek hegemony interceptors, angular, dark-hulled, dart-shaped with ventral thruster arrays, wheel through a debris field in tight formation, banking around the burning remains of a larger escort ship. The debris catches amber light from a nearby sun, tumbling slowly. In the background, the pale hull of the Bressy science vessel is partially visible, a single turret tracking and firing. The interceptors are in mid-evasive maneuver, engine wash bright against the void. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close on the dorsal hull of the Bressy science vessel, the point defense turret housing, scorched and venting trace atmosphere, still tracking. The turret swivels on its mounting with mechanical precision. Around the hull, the debris field is dense with wreckage. Three interceptor silhouettes are visible in the far distance, beginning to peel away. The turret fires once more into the retreating dark. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. An access hatch in the interior corridor of the Bressy science vessel opens from below. A stocky human woman drops through it feet first and lands on the deck, short, scarred, in a patched EVA suit with the helmet unsealed and pushed back. She is reaching back into the hatch to retrieve a spent charge casing, blackened and still warm. Her expression is flat, alert, already looking forward. The corridor is lit in cool blue emergency lighting. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The human woman stands in the corridor of the science vessel, holding a spent charge casing in one hand. A Vresi insectoid alien tall, pale thoraxed, with 4 compound amber eyes and thin secondary manipulator limbs stands at the observation port behind her, watching. The human's gaze is steady and direct. Her left shoulder sits slightly wrong, an injury compensated for. The corridor between them is lit in low emergency blue. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The Vresi science vessel's observation port, seen from inside. A spent charge casing tumbles away into the void outside, small, blackened, catching starlight once before the debris field swallows it. The insectoid alien presses close to the glass, its faceted amber eyes tracking the casing. The pale hull of the vessel and the wreckage-scattered debris field frame the shot. Stars burn cold in the far distance. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The Vresi science vessel drifts in open space, partially dark, running on minimal power, hull scored in, venting trace vapor from a patched breach on the starboard side. The debris field floats around it. Emergency lighting pulses faintly through the viewports. The distant rim sun casts long shadows across the hull. The vessel looks small against the debris and the dark. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Interior of the science vessel's galley, small, efficient, designed for Vresi proportions with low tables and wall-mounted nutrient dispensers. The human woman sits cross-legged on the deck, back against the bulkhead, eating a gelatinous Vresi ration pack with no expression of discomfort. Emergency lighting casts her in blue-white. She is eating methodically, without heat, her good hand working the pack open. Her damaged shoulder is held slightly elevated. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The human woman asleep against the ship's bulkhead, back to the wall, arms loose, eyes closed completely. The corridor is dim, emergency lighting at minimum. The alien insectoid stands in the passage nearby, observing her from a distance, its body posture uncertain, slightly angled away, as if unsure whether observation is permitted. The human sleeps without visible tension, as something that has never needed to be prey. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close on the human woman's left shoulder, she has retrieved a length of conduit pipe and a braided polymer cargo strap and is in the process of setting a broken collarbone herself. Her right hand braces the conduit. Her face is turned away and slightly taut, not a grimace, just contained. The cargo strap is looped in a functional knot, half-tied. The corridor behind her is empty. Emergency lighting. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close detail on the finished cargo strap shoulder brace, braided polymer strap wrap tied around the human woman's shoulder and upper chest in a precise load distributing pattern, the conduit brace seated correctly against the joint. Her suit is open at the collar. The knot is complex, efficient, tied one-handed. Her hand rests relaxed at her side, work already resumed. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The Vresi insectoid scientist at a secondary workstation, studying the human woman through an angled sightline to the engineering alcove beyond. The alien's forelimbs are extended over a data surface displaying xenobiology notes, typed in Vresi script, rapidly filled. Its amber compound eyes are focused not on the screen but on the human working in the alcove. The expression of its mandibles is difficult to read. Curious, maybe. Unable to stop. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The human woman in the engineering alcove, torquing a coupling seal on a blown power line with a left-handed tool, using her repaired shoulder in full rotation. Sparks drift from the exposed coupling. Her face is focused, impersonal, this is just work. Behind her, the alien scientist is visible at its workstation, watching. The alcove is lit orange from the coupling's thermal activity against the ship's cool blue emergency lighting. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Two figures in the Vressi science vessel's narrow corridor, the human woman leaning against the wall with her arms crossed, and the Vressi insectoid alien facing her with its data tablet extended. The tablet displays a xenobiology database entry for Sol 3 with a classification flag, Death World Class 12. The alien's body posture is one of focused inquiry. The human's expression is mildly amused. The corridor between them is tight, functional, lit in blue. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. A wide exterior shot of the Vressi science vessel drifting through the debris field, the wreckage of 3 escort ships scattered around it in slow rotation, catching the distant rim sun. The vessel is alone, small, its emergency lighting casting pale dots of color through the viewports. Debris ranges from small component fragments to large hull sections still bearing Vressi identification markings. The debris is still warm, one large piece still venting atmosphere in a slow, curling stream. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The sensor station display inside the science vessel a holographic readout showing the debris field in 3-dimensional scan. One faint thermal signature pulses near the center of the field, an ejection pod, small, scorched, broadcasting a low-frequency distress signal represented as a thin repeating wave across the bottom of the display. The Vressi scientist stands before it, one forelimb extended toward the signature. Its body is still. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The human woman stands at the open EVA equipment locker, pulling an EVA suit from its rack. The Vressi insectoid stands in the passage behind her, body angled forward, gesturing with a secondary manipulator, arguing, clearly, in the language of posture. The human is not looking at the alien. She is checking the suit's seal rings with practiced efficiency. The locker is lit from inside, casting both figures in warm white against the corridor's blue emergency lighting. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The Vressi science vessel's ventral airlock, interior side around pressure door with a thick seal ring and status lights. The green pressurized indicator is on. A suit-gloved hand can be seen through the small viewport in the door as the airlock cycles. The alien scientist stands a meter back, watching the pressure gauge drop. Its secondary manipulators are clasped together, a Vressi gesture of contained uncertainty. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Exterior of the science vessel's hull, the human woman in EVA suit moves through open space on thruster bursts, trailing a recovery line attached to her utility ring. The debris field surrounds her, large and dark, the wreckage of the escort ships tumbling slowly. In the far distance a small scorched ejection pod tumbles, its emergency beacon light blinking faintly amber. The human moves toward it without hesitation, very small against the scale of the debris. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close on the ejection pod in open space, a hegemony standard issue pod, roughly 2 meters long, scorched along one entire side, its hull plating blackened and partly delaminate from the escape sequence. The hegemony emblem is partially visible on the undamaged side. The beacon light blinks amber. A recovery line snakes toward it from the right side of the frame. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The human woman in EVA suit towing the ejection pod back toward the science vessel, moving hand over hand along the recovery line. The pod trails behind her, massive relative to her size. In the background, the pale hull of the science vessel and the open ventral airlock are visible. The debris field surrounds the scene. Her movement is steady, not urgent, just continuous. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The science vessel's airlock interior, the human woman inside, back to the camera, crouched over the scorched ejection pod. She has a multi-tool extended and is working the pod's emergency release mechanism. Her EVA suit helmet is still on. The airlock is cramped, lit in red amber from the hull breach alert strip along the ceiling. The pod fills most of the available floor space. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The ejection pod open on the airlock floor, interior visible, a hegemony pilot unconscious inside, four-limbed, with smooth pale gray dermal plating and a long laceration across the thorax sealed badly with emergency foam. The pilot's face is turned slightly, eyes closed. The pod interior is lit only by the ambient airlock light. The human woman's gloved hands are visible at the pod's edge, steady.
Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.
The human woman carrying the hegemony pilot through the science vessel's corridor, the pilot slung over her functional shoulder, his forelimbs loose with unconsciousness, his dermal plating pale gray and scaled. She moves steadily, the cargo strap brace on her broken shoulder bearing partial load.
The corridor is narrow and blue-lit.
No urgency in her gait, just the specific economy of someone who has decided something and is doing it.
Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The science vessel's medbay, a compact space with a central examination surface, wall-mounted VRESI medical equipment, and soft white lighting.
The human woman lays the hegemony pilot onto the surface with careful adjustment of his position, checking his breathing with 2 fingers against his neck.
The pilot's forelimb form is still.
On the shelf beside the surface, she places a ration pack. Her expression is focused and impersonal. This is also just work.
Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.
The medbay door closing, the human woman in the corridor, the door panel beside her.
The occupied indicator light glows green.
She stands with one hand still resting on the doorframe, looking at nothing in particular, expression neutral. In the background, the VRESI insectoid scientist is visible at the sensor station, its amber eyes on the door panel light.
Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close on the medbay indicator panel, the small standard shipboard display, occupied, the indicator light steady green.
The panel is unremarkable, institutional, designed for function.
The VRESI alien's forelimb is visible in frame, not touching the panel, just near it. The light is green. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.
The VRESI scientist at its workstation, a new document open on the display, the cursor blinking in an empty title field.
The alien is not typing. Its faceted eyes are not on the screen. It is looking at the medbay door.
The corridor behind it is empty. The ship hums with minimal power. The alien's body is very still, secondary manipulators folded tight, the VRESI posture of something trying to think through a problem that resists the available framework.
Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.
Wide shot of the science vessel bridge, the main holographic display showing the debris field, the vessel's position within it, and the distant hegemony patrol grid overlay in red. The human woman stands at the tactical console studying the display.
The VRESI scientist is at the science station to the right.
The hegemony pilot, now conscious, dermal plating cycling slowly through stress colors, amber to gray, stands in the medbay doorway in the background, watching.
3 figures in one frame. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.
Exterior wide shot, the vast dark of space, the scattered debris field, and, then, erupting into being 14 kilometers from the science vessel, the hegemony annihilator. It drops out of fold space in a contained burst of gravitational distortion, its hull enormous, angular, dark, massing 90 times the science vessel, its weapons batteries visible as rows of dark apertures along its flanks.
The science vessel is tiny in frame by comparison. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.
Close on the hegemony annihilator, hull detail, black-gray composite plating in overlapping sections, tactical sensor arrays rotating along the upper ridge, 47 weapons batteries in staggered rows, drive signature still dissipating from fold emergence. Scale indicated by the distant speck of the science vessel in the lower right corner of the frame.
The annihilator is not searching.
It already knows where to look.
Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.
Inside the science vessel, the human woman, the VRESI scientist, and the hegemony pilot all looking at the tactical display.
The display shows the annihilator's profile, its mass, its armament, its distance. The secondary screen shows a probability readout, 4%. The hegemony pilot's dermal plating has gone deep gray. The VRESI scientist's secondary manipulators are pressed flat, high-stress posture.
The human woman's expression has not changed.
Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.
Close on the secondary display showing the probability readout, the number 4% in large, clean figures against the dark screen.
Nothing else on the display.
The human woman's hand is partially visible in frame, resting relaxed on the console edge beside it.
Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.
The human woman already moving away from the tactical console toward the engineering alcove, her back to the 4% readout, her stride the same as it always is. The HFY scientist remains at the console, looking between the probability display and the retreating human.
The hegemony pilot has stepped fully out of the medbay doorway now, watching her go. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.
The engineering alcove, the human woman crouching at the open full drive access panel, her wrist display showing a hand-drawn schematic in rough shorthand. She is pulling components from the panel, full drive coils, resonance capacitors, jury-rigged connections. The hegemony pilot moves to crouch beside her, pointing at a secondary coil with a four-fingered hand.
They are both focused on the panel. Not looking at each other. Working. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.
Close on the human woman and the hegemony pilot working together at the full drive access panel, her hands on one component, his four-fingered hands on an adjacent one, the configuration between them taking shape. The pilot's dermal plating has shifted from stress gray toward a steadier neutral tone.
Her cargo strap shoulder brace is visible. Sparks drift from the open panel.
The work is quiet, focused, two beings who should not be in this situation treating it as a situation they are in.
Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.
The HFY scientist at the navigation array station, a curved console with three-dimensional NAV display projecting above it, showing the debris field corridor route. The alien's forelimbs are on the control surface, making pre-calculations. The debris corridor is highlighted on the display, threading through the densest part of the field.
The alien is still, focused, its amber eyes moving between the display and the engineering alcove in the background. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.
Interior wide shot of the science vessel, all three beings at their stations, the human woman deep in the full drive access panel, the hegemony pilot beside her, the HFY scientist at the NAV array.
Emergency lighting at full.
The Annihilator's silhouette is visible on the main tactical display in the background, enormous and motionless.
Each of them is working. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.
The full drive access panel close-up, the configuration nearly complete, resonance coils connected in tandem, capacitors wired in a sequence that does not match the original factory design. The human woman's hands and the hegemony pilot's four-fingered hands are both visible, making simultaneous adjustments.
Sparks from the connections. The panel is deep in the hull, cramped, lit only by component indicator lights. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.
Exterior wide shot, the science vessel at the edge of the debris field, holding position.
The Annihilator is visible in the far distance, sensors sweeping.
The debris field, 300 meters of shattered HFY escort ships, is dark and still.
Waiting. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.
The full drive collapse, exterior shot, a ripple of gravitational distortion erupts from the science vessel's drive section, propagating outward through the debris field in a visible wave. The metal debris shudders, every piece vibrating at the same frequency simultaneously. The wave is not an explosion, it is a resonance, a shiver moving through the wreckage like a sound through a medium. The light catching the debris creates a brief staccato shimmer across the field.
Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.
Interior of the Annihilator's tactical bridge, a vast dark space with tiered stations and a central holographic display. The display is flooded, 40-fold signatures appearing simultaneously around the debris field, each one displaying as a hostile emergence point. Hegemony officers, four-limbed, pale-plated, uniformed in dark gray, are frozen at their consoles, staring at the display. One stands at the command position, hand raised in the universal gesture of hold.
Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.
The science vessel entering the debris corridor, the NAV display showing the route through the wreckage, the pale meridian moving into the gap between two massive hull sections of the destroyed escort ships. The corridor is dark and tight, debris on all sides. Emergency lighting on the science vessel casts pale blue light across the surrounding wreckage.
The VRESI scientist is visible through the bridge viewport at the end of the array. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.
Close interior shot, the VRESI scientist at the end of the array, forelimbs moving rapidly over the control surface, making manual corrections at speed. The three-dimensional display updates with each correction, debris positions adjusting, the corridor shifting. The alien's compound eyes are focused completely on the display.
Secondary manipulators folded against its thorax.
Its body is in a state of concentrated motion. This is precision, not panic.
Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.
The science vessel moving through the debris corridor exterior, debris on all sides, whole sections of the patient's in resolution towering over the smaller ship.
The corridor is barely wider than the science vessel. Debris drifts.
The ship moves at minimum thrust, steady, threading through a gap that should not be navigable.
Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.
The secondary coupling in the engineering alcove blowing a sharp crack and a flash of white-hot metal, coolant vapor erupting from the broken line. The human woman is already inside the access panel, her suited hands moving toward the failure point. The hegemony pilot is braced against the alcove wall, arms up, deflecting debris. The explosion is contained but violent in the cramped space.
Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.
Interior, the hegemony pilot in the doorway to the engineering alcove, calling toward the array station where the VRESI scientist is working. The pilot's four-fingered hand is extended, pointing at something on the damaged display. His dermal plating is cycling between stress gray and a new color, something closer to the steady neutral of focus.
He is helping. He knows he is helping. He is doing it anyway. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.
The human woman inside the blown coupling access, her suited hands working rapidly in the narrow, hot space, quick bond compound applied to the breach, the coupling sealed by improvised means.
Coolant vapor still drifting.
Her EVA suit has a new shrapnel tear on the left forearm, already sealed with the forearm mount quick bond. Her expression, visible through the unsealed helmet, is focused and entirely untroubled.
Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.
The science vessel emerging from the far end of the debris corridor exterior shot, the ship clearing the last gap between the wreckage sections and moving into open space.
Clean dark ahead of it.
Behind it, the debris field still shivering with the resonance pulse.
The annihilator is visible in the far distance, sensor arrays still pointed at the false fold signatures in the debris. The science vessel is small and intact and moving. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.
Interior of the science vessel, the human woman emerging from the engineering alcove access panel, leaning against the frame. Her suit has the new tier, sealed. Her shoulder is held slightly elevated, the compensation is there if you know what to look for. She is looking at the tactical display, where the annihilator's sensor sweeps are still pointed at the debris field. Her expression is the working face, flat, alert, already oriented forward.
Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.
The annihilator beginning to turn exterior, its massive hull rotating slowly on a new bearing as the tactical team finishes its confirmation scan and realizes the fold signatures were false. The ship is enormous in frame. The science vessel is not visible from this angle, it is already on the other side of the debris field, in the clear.
The annihilator's weapons batteries are dark. It is computing. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The annihilator's drive signature on the sensor display inside the science vessel, the alien scientist at the sensor station, watching the signature diminish. The graph shows the annihilator decelerating, turning, the thermal signature of its drive moving away. Not toward the science vessel. Away.
The VRESI scientist's secondary manipulators are loose, the stress posture has changed.
Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.
Exterior, the annihilator's drive signature receding in the dark, its hull growing smaller in frame as it withdraws. The debris field is in the foreground, still. The rim sun illuminates the scene from the far right. In the lower left corner of the frame,
the pale hull of the science vessel is just visible, running on minimal power, intact. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The science vessel's observation deck, a small compartment at the fore of the ship with a wide curved viewport showing the stars and the fading scatter of the debris field. The three figures have gathered here. The human woman stands at the viewport, back to the others, looking out. The hegemony pilot sits on the edge of the observation bench, his dermal plating in the slow amber to gray post-adrenaline shift. The Vresi scientist stands to the side with a ration pack in its forelimbs. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close on the human woman at the observation viewport, her scarred face in three-quarter profile, lit by starlight through the glass and the faint emergency lighting of the observation deck. Her expression is not victorious. Not relieved. Just present, already somewhere ahead in her thinking. The stars are reflected in the viewport glass, layered over her reflection. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The human woman holding the ration pack, then, extending it toward the hegemony pilot sitting on the observation bench. The pilot's four-fingered hands come up to receive it. The packet is small between them, this ordinary foil-sealed thing, exchanged in a half-dark observation room, between a human and a hegemony pilot who tried to kill her 18 hours ago. The Vresi scientist is visible in the background, watching. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close on the hegemony pilot's hands holding the ration pack, four fingers, slightly too long, smooth gray dermal plating. The foil surface of the ration pack catches the observation deck's dim light. His hands are moving slowly over the surface before opening it, not in hesitation, but in a particular kind of careful attention. A way of holding things. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The Vresi scientist at a workstation in the corridor adjacent to the observation deck, a document open and filling rapidly with text, 12,000 words approximated by the density of the Vresi script on the display. The alien is typing with all four of its primary forelimbs, faster than it usually does. Its compound eyes reflect the screen. The observation deck doorway is visible behind it, the other two figures in warm shadow within. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The Xenobiology Transmission Interface, a holographic display showing the transmission address list, for Vresi academic institutions, 7 individual researchers. The document is queued for transmission. At the bottom of the display, the annotation field shows the final note in Vresi script. The transmission button is active. The alien's forelimb is extended toward it. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The transmission sent, the display showing transmission confirmed, the document marked delivered to all 12 addresses. The timestamp in the corner. The alien scientist remains before the display, secondary manipulators still extended, after the transmission completes. It does not move for a long moment. The screen reflects in its compound eyes. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Close on the alien scientist's workstation, a new document open, the cursor blinking in the empty title field. The alien has typed one word in Vresi script, a new word, never used before in any Vresi document, an invented compound meaning something no existing word captures. The cursor blinks after it. Below, on the next line, it has typed, Day 1. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. Wide shot of the observation deck from outside the viewport, the three figures visible through the curved glass. The human woman at the window. The hegemony pilot on the bench. The Vresi scientist at its workstation in the adjacent corridor, now closing the document and leaning back. The stars surrounding the vessel in all directions. The rim sun small and steady at the right edge of frame. The ship is intact. All three are alive. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting. The science vessel from exterior, hull, drifting, its hull scored and venting trace vapor from the patched sections, its full drive housing dark and cold and spent. Emergency lighting pulses softly through the viewports. The debris field surrounds it in the near distance, the wreckage of what should have been its graveyard. The rim sun illuminates it evenly. It is a very small ship. It is still there. Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.
Final wide shot, deep space, the rim sun a distant warm point, the debris field scattered and, still, the science vessel drifting in the open dark beyond the corridor.
No annihilator. No interceptors.
Just the vessel and, the stars and, the light falling evenly on everything.
Cinematic sci-fi illustration, dramatic lighting, deep space setting.